Picture this: the most powerful person on earth. Armies march at their command, rivers bend to water their gardens, and their word is law across empires. Now picture that same person at midnight, barefoot on cold marble, torch in hand, terrified of the shadow following them. Sounds like a horror movie, right? But it wasn't fiction. For ancient kings, absolute power came with a curse, paranoia so deep it turned their palaces into prisons. Tonight, we'll step inside that gilded cage and uncover why the most powerful rulers in history feared their own shadows. Let's start our journey with Cambyses II of Persia, the son of a legend, the mighty Cyrus the Great. Imagine the weight of that legacy. Cyrus, the founder of the Achaemenid Empire, a conqueror revered even by his enemies, a man whose name echoed across continents. At just 23, Cambyses inherited an empire that stretched from the sun-baked banks of the Indus River all the way to the sparkling Aegean Sea. It was an inheritance of unimaginable wealth and power, a tapestry of cultures and peoples woven together by his father's genius. Every satrap, from the ancient city of Babylon to the bustling markets of Memphis, swore loyalty to him, at least on paper. But in the hushed, private chambers of their palaces, behind closed doors and beneath lowered voices, those same satraps and ambitious courtiers whispered. "He's half Median, half Persian," they'd murmur, casting doubt on his pure Achaemenid lineage. Raised in the harem, never truly tested in battle like his father. These whispers were the first tiny pebbles in what would rapidly become an avalanche of suspicion and paranoia for Cambyses. He couldn't walk a single corridor of his vast palace without imagining a glint of steel, a knife lurking behind every heavy curtain. So he started pulling. The curtains down, metaphorically tearing away anything that might conceal a threat. The first casualty of this spiraling paranoia was heartbreakingly intimate: his own younger brother, Bardia. Cambyses, convinced Bardia harbored ambitions for the throne, had him executed in secret. To solidify his power, he eliminated the one person who shared his blood. But secrets, especially bloody ones, rarely stay buried in royal courts. When the royal treasurer, a man of considerable influence, dared to object to the cover-up, he became the next to fall. Each death, each act of brutal suppression didn't quell the rumors, it amplified them. Each death bred 5 new whispers, which in turn bred 5 more deaths, like a malignant cancer spreading through the court. The palace, once a symbol of imperial majesty, began to feel less like a seat of power and more like a slaughterhouse. The Greek historian Herodotus, our primary source for much of this period, suggests that Cambyses' grip on reality finally snapped during his Egyptian campaign. In a grotesque display of contempt for Egyptian religion, he publicly skewered the sacred Apis calf with his own sword, right there in the temple. He laughed, a wild, unhinged sound, because he suspected the priests were mocking him in secret. The troops, hardened warriors, watched their god-king desecrate a sacred animal, and a terrifying realization settled among them: our leader is losing his mind. On the long march home from Egypt, Cambyses suffered a minor leg wound. Infection set in, and a raging fever began to cook whatever fragile sanity was left. One morning, his own loyal sword-bearer found him dead in his tent. There was no assassin, no poison, no grand conspiracy. Just a simple abscess that had poisoned his blood, a mundane end to a reign consumed by extraordinary paranoia. Empire, exhausted by the relentless cycle of suspicion, collectively sighed in relief. But that relief was short-lived. The moment his death was confirmed, the vast Persian Empire immediately collapsed into a brutal civil war. The lesson here is brutal. The fastest way to lose a throne is to keep tightening the bolts of control until the entire seat cracks, shatters, and collapses. So how many bodyguards does it take to feel safe when you've already murdered half your family and your closest advisors? The chilling answer is there's never enough. History teaches this same lesson time and time again. Power, when clutched too tightly, becomes a boomerang with a razor-sharp edge. It might feel secure for a moment, but it always comes back to cut the hand that threw it. While you mull over that sobering thought, if these glimpses into the dark heart of power make you appreciate the simple luxury of peace of mind, consider hitting that like button. It lets us know you value these dives into the shadows of history. Be sure to subscribe and ring the bell because our journey isn't over. Soon, we'll explore why Roman emperors kept personal food tasters, even while their own people starved. But for now, let's get back to the shadows because they're only getting longer. Now, let's fast forward a couple of centuries. We're leaving the deserts of Persia and jumping across the Mediterranean to the tumultuous Hellenistic world. Here, we meet Dionysius I of Syracuse, the textbook tyrant. Syracuse on the island of Sicily was the economic and strategic powerhouse of the 4th century BCE. Think of it as the Silicon Valley of its day, a hub of innovation, trade, and immense wealth. And Dionysius, he owned it all. He didn't just rule Syracuse, he was Syracuse. Yet, despite his absolute dominion, Dionysius harbored a fear so profound that he slept in a bedchamber surrounded by a moat. Yes, you heard that right, a moat. Inside his palace. Every single night, the drawbridge to his private sanctuary was hoisted, sealing him off from the rest of the world. Only his most trusted mercenaries stood guard. Trusted, of course, until they weren't. Because for a tyrant, trust is a fleeting illusion. To guarantee their obedience, Dionysius employed an insidious psychological tactic. He forced his guards to sign confessions of imaginary crimes, fabricated accusations of treason. He held these confessions over their heads like the legendary sword of Damocles, ready to drop at any moment. Imagine living under that constant threat, knowing your life could be forfeit not for what you did, but for what your king imagined you might do. But Dionysius wasn't content with just confessions. He commissioned the ear of Dionysius, a massive, cave-shaped interrogation chamber carved into rock, designed with such acoustic precision that every whisper made within bounced back, amplified to a hidden listening post. Visitors assumed it was for spying on prisoners, but insiders knew its true, more sinister purpose. It was for spying on his own guards during shift change, searching for the slightest hint of disloyalty. His paranoia wasn't limited to his guards. Even his own daughters weren't safe. They were married off in grand public ceremonies, but the moment the celebrations ended, they were confined to the women's quarters, essentially imprisoned. Why? So they couldn't breed rival bloodlines, so their children wouldn't become potential claimants to his throne. Eventually, the relentless stress began to corrode the man himself. Dionysius suffered from chronic ulcers, his hair fell out, and his eyes were so bloodshot with sleepless fear that courtiers swore he could see conspiracies in 3D when a throat infection finally choked him to death at the age of 56. The entire city erupted in spontaneous street parties. Statues of the tyrant were toppled within hours. His infamous moat was drained and immediately turned into a public fish pond. The moral of Dionysius's story is stark. If your security plan involves sleeping on an artificial island inside your own capital, you've already lost the people. And when you lose the people, your rule is already over. Let's fast forward once more, this time to 37 CE, and sail east to the arid lands of Judea. Here we encounter another colossal figure of power and paranoia, Herod the Great, Rome's client king. Herod's early life was a masterclass in political maneuvering. He wasn't born into a prestigious lineage, half Idumean, half Nabatean, but he was 100% political chameleon, making himself indispensable to Mark Antony and later, Augustus Caesar. The Romans loved his efficiency, and his Jewish subjects tolerated his rule, especially after he began a magnificent renovation of their sacred temple in Jerusalem. But age, coupled with escalating paranoia and a horrifying string of family murders, transformed Herod into something out of a ghost story. He executed his beloved wife, Mariamne, convinced she was plotting against him. A few years later, he killed her brother. Then in a horrific crescendo, he executed two of his own sons, Alexander and Aristobulus IV, convinced they were conspiring to usurp him. The stories of Herod's brutality spread to Rome. Emperor Augustus, a man not easily shocked, reportedly quipped, "It is safer to be Herod's pig than his son," a dark testament to Herod's reputation for murdering his children while upholding Jewish dietary laws. Herod's final act, as death approached, is the stuff of nightmares. Knowing no one in Judea would mourn him, he issued a chilling order: arrest every prominent citizen in Jerusalem and lock them in the city's hippodrome. His decree was that the moment he breathed his last, his army was to massacre every single one of them. He wanted to ensure that even in death, there would be mourning in Jerusalem. Mercifully, this horrific order was never carried out. His sister, Salome, countermanded it the moment he died. Still, the rumor mill added another layer to his legend. He feared his own shadow so much he tried to kill the city's future rather than face it. After his death, the Herodian name became a shorthand, not for greatness, but for tyrannical family holidays, a grim reference to the deadly intrigue that plagued his household. Herod's life is a stark reminder that when you declare war on your own reflection, you've already lost the battle for your soul. 3 kings, 3 continents, 3 different eras. Yet they all ran through the same tragic loop. Absolute power, unchecked and unchallenged, inevitably fries the very wiring in the human brain that distinguishes friend from foe. Our brains simply aren't built for that kind of isolation and constant threat assessment. Modern neuroscience calls one aspect of this power-induced reduction in mirroring. In plain English, the more power you accumulate, the less activity shows up in the neural circuits responsible for empathy. In essence, power can turn off empathy like a light switch. You literally become less capable of connecting with the suffering of others. Now, add to this chronic sleep deprivation. Who can sleep soundly when every cricket chirp might be an assassin's signal? This constant vigilance pushes the brain to its limits. When you combine reduced empathy with severe sleep deprivation in an environment of constant threat, you get a perfect recipe for hallucinating enemies where none exist. The shadow following Cambyses wasn't just a silhouette on a wall. It was the court's whispered resentment, projected back onto him by a mind frayed by paranoia. Dionysius's moat wasn't keeping danger out. It was trapping his own dread inside until it consumed him from within. And Herod's final malevolent order is perhaps the clearest proof of all. He feared the future so deeply that he tried to cancel it on his way to the grave. These aren't just stories of ancient tyrants. They're cautionary tales about the human mind under unbearable pressure. These men ruled empires richer and more sprawling than many of today's multinational corporations. They commanded vast resources, and yet they died frightened children trapped in jeweled cages of their own making. Their tragedy wasn't a dramatic poison or a swift blade. It was the slow, dawning realization that the higher you rise, the thinner the air becomes, and the louder the echoes of your own footsteps reverberate in the empty halls of power. A throne is just a chair. It only becomes something more when a human sits on it and decides the world must bend to their will or break. From that moment, the true crown they wear isn't made of gold. It's forged of suspicion, hammered out of mistrust, and embedded with the sharp shards of paranoia. In that gilded, lonely existence, every hallway looks longer and darker in the encroaching shadows. So the next time you envy the powerful, remember this: nobody fears the dark quite like the one who lit the fire that now casts those very shadows. If you ever wonder how absolute power truly feels, take a hard look at your own shadow. Then ask yourself, honestly, would you trust it with a knife? For these kings, the final lesson is simple: when you have absolute power, your greatest enemy isn't the assassin in the dark. It's the man on the throne.